All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really powerful, multi-layered vocabulary word. You know, we use language every single day to categorize our world, to tell people what's actually important to us, and to signal what isn't. But sometimes, a single word carries so much historical weight and so many subtle shades of meaning that we honestly only ever use a tiny fraction of its true power. Today, we're going to unpack one of those exact words. So I want you to start by just thinking about those quiet, truly special moments in life. Picture a beautiful ceremony, a solemn memorial, or even just standing in the echoing sanctuary of a massive cathedral. There's a totally different atmosphere there, right? A real sense of reverence. But what happens when someone breaks that respect? Where exactly is the line between a sacred, untouchable moment and just completely disrespectful behavior? Well, human language actually gives us a highly specific tool to describe crossing that exact boundary.
Section 1. Meet the word. Let's get to know profane.
All right, let's pull back the curtain and officially meet our target word of the day. The word is profane. Actually, do me a favor, say it out loud with me right now. Profane. You hear that? Notice the emphasis right there on the second syllable. It rhymes perfectly with the word rain. Profane. It's just a little two-syllable word, but man, it packs a serious punch.
And what's actually really cool here is how incredibly flexible this word is across its whole morphological family. You're mostly going to see it used as an adjective to describe things, sure, but it also totally works as a transitive verb. You can even shapeshift it into an adverb like profanely or a noun, profaneness. Having all these little variations in your back pocket, it absolutely upgrades your vocabulary toolkit, letting you drop this concept into almost any sentence structure.
Moving on to Section 2. An archipelago of meanings. Let's look at its multiple senses.
See, when we talk about profane, we're not just looking at some basic one-and-done dictionary definition. It's actually better to picture it like an archipelago, a group of distinct but connected islands of meaning. Let's map those out. As an adjective, profane covers three totally different territories. First, it can mean being irreverent or disrespectful towards something sacred. Second, and okay, this is definitely the one you're most familiar with, it means vulgar or obscene, like, swearing. But the third island, this is the most surprising one and honestly the most forgotten. It literally just means worldly or secular. Not evil, not bad, just not religious. It's just everyday, ordinary stuff.
Then we've got the verb form. To profane something sacred means to treat it disrespectfully, to defile it. This is not some passive state of being. It's a highly active verb. It represents the actual physical, emotional, or verbal act of crossing a recognized boundary and actively ruining the purity or respect of a space or an object.
So what does this all mean? The absolute crucial takeaway here is the shared idea lying underneath all these different islands. Whether you're using it as an adjective or an active verb, the core DNA of profane is all about a line. It's the line between the sacred, the special, the pure, and the ordinary, the everyday, or the vulgar. Profane is the exact word we use to describe whatever exists on the other side of that line, or the very act of crossing it.
Section 3. The Latin origin. Let's look at that pro prefix.
To really lock this into our brains and figure out why it means what it means, we've got to play word historian for a second. Profane kicks off with the ancient Latin prefix pro. Now in Latin, pro translates to before or forth. So I want you to hold on to that spatial relationship, the idea of standing in front of something or standing outside of it. Because this brilliantly illustrates the history of the whole word. Picture an ancient sacred temple. Inside is what the Romans called the forum, the dedicated sacred space. Well, if you are standing pro the forum, literally before the temple, or right outside its doors, you are standing on ordinary worldly ground. You are, quite literally, outside the sacred space. Over centuries, that physical description evolved. It grew to describe anything belonging to the ordinary, non-sacred world, and eventually, things that were actively disrespectful to the sacred. I mean, isn't it kind of amazing how ancient architecture literally shaped the vocabulary we use today?
Which brings us to Section 4, Word Detective in Action. Let's look at usage and context.
All right, time to put on our word detective hats. We've got the theory, we know the history, but to truly master this, we have to see it in action, because context is absolutely everything in language. Here's our first piece of evidence. The crowd was shocked by the speaker's profane language. In this context, it's pretty clear the word leans heavily into that second island of meaning we talked about. It means crude, obscene, vulgar. It's the classic definition most of us jump to immediately when we hear it on TV or out on the street.
But check out this second example. It's got a totally different flavor. He set aside his profane worldly concerns and entered the monastery. Here, profane absolutely does not mean the guy was swearing or had bad habits. It simply means his concerns were of the secular world. We're talking paying bills, commuting to work, buying groceries, everyday non-religious matters. In this context, the word is completely 100% emotionally neutral.
And finally, let's look at the verb in action. The invaders profaned the temple by storming through it. Right there, we see the active defilement. These invaders violently cross that physical boundary from the ordinary world into the sacred space, treating it with total disrespect. It's the literal action of breaking a boundary.
What I find fascinating here is comparing these usages side by side. Look at profane language right next to profane matters. The entire tone of the word shifts based solely on the noun sitting next to it. Profane language? Highly crude, offensive, super negative. But profane matters? Those are just everyday, worldly things that you and I deal with constantly. Same exact word, but the surrounding context drastically changes its emotional weight.
And because that meaning shifts so wildly, its antonyms, its opposites, have to shift too. If you're using profane to mean vulgar, the opposite might be pure or reverent. But if you're hanging out on that third island of meaning where it just means worldly or everyday, well, the opposite is simply sacred or religious. This chameleon-like flexibility is exactly why this is considered an advanced vocabulary term. You really have to read the room or the sentence to know which opposite applies.
And that leads us into Section 5, your turn to try using the worldly sense.
Okay, we've broken down the definitions, we've explored the ancient Roman history, and we've investigated real-world contexts. You've officially toured the archipelago. Now it is your turn to take the wheel. I've got a provocative challenge for you before we wrap this explainer up. Can you use the word profane in a sentence today using its worldly, completely non-religious sense? I seriously challenge you to try this. Deliberately use the most forgotten, historically neutral version of the word. Maybe complain about your profane weekend errands or talk about your profane hobbies. Remember, profane is so much more than just a fancy synonym for a swear word. It is a fascinating historical bridge between the sacred and the ordinary. Think about the lines you draw in your own life between the special and the everyday. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible hidden world of language.